So first of all, Peter, thank you for your time to share our thoughts and ideas about your work. And well, first of all, I would like to ask you, how did you arrive to the kind of site-specific works that you mostly do today?
It's a long process, you know. I mean, I'm doing this for many years, and I got seriously involved into the art scene in the late 70s, which was mainly, I mean, I was 20, I was very young, and in the 70s, the main focus was on conceptual art and on performance. So it was activities that have been kind of immaterial. So it was very unusual that an artist would do paintings or classical sculptures. But as you know, this kind of changed radically in the 80s. And this caused for me a kind of confusion, because I was just getting ready to be involved in conceptual things, and then the classical forms came back. So I was never doing paintings, but I was always interested in painting as a kind of artistic convention, if you want so. But from the very beginning, I was very much interested in the relation between the painting and the space. That means architecture. And in particular, in the early 80s, I did a lot of research about, on one hand, science fiction movies, which I think is still an issue in my work. And on the other hand, on film architecture in general, especially from the 20s and the 30s. So movies like Metropolis or Caligari or Nosferatu, you know, this kind of dark, very loaded films, masterworks. And in these films, the architecture doesn't fulfill a kind of function in terms of usability. So the only, the main thing is the kind of the emotional part. And I think that's still an aspect I'm interested in. In 84, the Macintosh was introduced, and this was the moment where I decided that the tool I'm going to work in the future will be a digital tool, will be the computer. And at that time, of course, the programs have been very simple and the possibilities very limited. But from then on, it was clear that this is a kind of paradigmatic shift, and this is going to change our notion of images, our contribution of images, and also the production of images. And this was leading, I mean, this was leading from two-dimensional work to the painting in the space, in the gallery space or in the exhibition space. And at a certain moment, I skipped the painting, and there was just a space left. So this was the kind of development over the years.
I think that Caligari should have been a very huge influence, because the notion of space is very, very different from any other science fiction movie. And that idea of an invasion of a space and an immersion in a space is something that is very clear in your work. And could you tell us something about the imaginary in your work? Because there are some images that are repeated. Like, for example, I saw a Super 8 movie in your webpage that it has an ant that moves around along many things.
Well, it's a kind of like, it's like a visual vocabulary. There are a few visual images I'm using since more or less the beginning. The ant that you mentioned, the tube, the globe, the brain. So these are all images that they have a kind of universal dimension. So they are very easy to have an access to. They are not very much determined by a specific culture. So I assume in Asia they mean something similar as in South America or in Europe. And 92, I was invited to the Documenta 9 in Kassel. And I was then more or less a no-name and was put in a very prominent place in the entrance hall next to the maybe key figure of the show, Bruce Nauman. And the work was published very often in magazines, papers, but also on TV programs, because I think that's the reason, because the image is so significant and the image is perfect for reproduction. So everybody has an idea what an ant is. The connotations, there are positive connotations, there are also kind of irritating connotations. It's black and white, it's very significant. In a big amount, it builds a kind of ornament. It's also about the collective. There are kind of social connotations. But all these kind of aspects have not been the reason why I was choosing it for a Super 8 film. The Super 8 film was done in a garden in Italy in a friend's house, and there was a newspaper on the ground in the grass, and an ant was running over it. And it seemed very attractive because it looked like a letter started to move. You know, it's not the ant in the grass. It's not the ant in nature. It's the body in relation to a system of information. And I think this is still a key aspect. It's about communication.
And how architecture has begun to be included in your work, because I think there is a different confrontation with the space in your work, because you begin with an idea of more close to the idea of wallpaper, and then you move into something that takes over the whole space and produce some spaces that are more thought for an immersion experience, no, an immersive experience. How this idea of architecture has evolved in your work?
This specific kind of space has to do with the tool, you know. I think it has to do when we look at the history of architecture. Of course, the tools and the methods had always an influence on the built architecture.
And how do you manage the difference between the real space and the computer space? Because something is project a work in the computer, and then you have to go to the real space. How this relationship have evolved in your work?
I mean, it was growing. The first project had been very simple, also because in the late 80s, early 90s, it was just 6 screen that you had to do large scale images. So digital printers, large scale digital printers are just 20 years old. So there was a kind of development in terms of the technique, but I think the procedure was always more or less the same. So I go and see a space, and because of the specific circumstances, I decide what kind of motif, what kind of scale, what kind of material, because in the meantime, it's also possible to do moving spaces. It's not just a wallpaper space anymore. You can project the whole space, and you can rotate the space or drop the space. So, but usually the first thing is to see the space and then to develop. project, but of course there are also kind of exceptions, like our show in Buenos Aires, because unfortunately I was not able to travel, which I really regret, and I hope I can do that in the future. So this project is really based on digital information and conversations we did like we do now. You know, this is a kind of, it's unbelievable anyway that this is possible.
How do you conceive the viewer's experience? I mean, it's something that you somehow imagine from the beginning of your project, or is something that appears along the production of the project? I mean, or after the treatment of the space. Is the viewer's experience from the beginning of your project, or is something that appears later?
Well, it makes a difference if you make a show in a museum or you make an installation in a subway station. You know, it's a different public, it's different people, and I think that's something to consider. So in a museum context, of course, there is a possibility to deal with more specific information. You can assume that people know something about the history of art from the last century and now. When you do something in public space, the situation is very different. You know, it's a wide range of spectators, and so I consider the context. That's something that plays a role. For me, it's always very interesting how kids are reacting, you know, because kids, this is very direct. So if it works with kids, it means something. So I did an installation in the Centre Pompidou, in the Forum. This is this lower part. I was invited to do a video installation there, and I decided to do a labyrinth, a maze with white rats. You know, there is one rat coming in, it's running, and then the second. And I didn't know that the kindergarten is next to it. And it turned out that the kids would react extremely on that work. So parents had to take them out because they would run until they are completely exhausted. So these are very interesting experiences, you know, because it means that there is an aspect in the work that communicates very direct.
Good. And now that you are talking about video installation, can you tell us something about the use of moving images or the use of sound that usually appears in your video installations in special?
Well, I was mentioning my interest in the movies, so there was always an interest in the moving image, of course. So because it's another kind of powerful medium, and it developed over the years. Because in the early 80s, I was happy to have a still image in a decent resolution. But of course, all that changed in the last. We're talking about almost 40 years now. Mm-hmm. And that's the great thing when you work with a tool like that even though your ideas are limited, you always are participating on a technical development. So that's a great thing that you can always adjust it on the possibility of the moment, and maybe to try to push even the limits. For the sound, it's also since many years always my same kind of colleague and partner, Franz Pommersl, who is doing the sound. So I believe in sharing the labor, working with specialists, and Pommersl is a great guy, using sound almost like a sculpture. It has a very physical appearance. We work together since many years.
And can you tell us something more about the installation at Proa Foundation? I don't know. Well, there are many things there. For example, this idea of entering a space and face this work very at the beginning of this exhibition is really fantastic, and it's really something amazing. But you know, I remember in 1997 when you did this huge installation for Documenta, you have a very interesting dialogue with this huge glass wall and the space outside, this nature space. And here something similar happens, because you know that the wall to enter Proa is a glass wall, and you have a very interesting relationship between your work in the exhibition and the work outside. And outside you have a very small river, and a very different context than the one in the installation in the exhibition. So have you thought something about this context? Well, of course, the special architecture of Proa. How you tell us something more about how you conceived this project?
Cecilia was sending me photos of the installation, and you have the staircase going up. Mm-hmm. And I was using this kind of cube-like distorted structure. And without a visitor, it's so difficult to recognize where the staircase goes through. It's even hard to tell what is up and what is down. It's really kind of it's the notion of space is very irritated. So when I got the invitation for the exhibition in Proa, I was very happy that it's the entrance hall. This is a situation I found myself very often in group shows, that I was in the entrance hall or in the staircase, or like in Castle 97, it's like a huge long corridor. So it's not the kind of classic space where you look at art in a kind of contemplative, silent way. It's more the situation of transition, of moving through a space. And I was asking myself, why is that? Why they always put me in that spaces? And probably one reason is that it's fast information I'm working with. It's nothing where you have to spend 10 minutes in front of. It's something that you get when you pass by. And so on the level of galleries or museums, it's the entrance halls or the staircases. When you put that on the scale of a city, it's probably the subway station or the railway station or the airport. So these are the kind of hubs that you have in a kind of architectonical system, and I like that. So I feel comfortable with that aspect.
Yeah.
In Proa, it's especially beautiful with the glass entrance that you see already the installation already from the square outside. And we installed everything during the lockdown, so even then it was possible to have an idea of the space and to work.
Mm-hmm. It has, I think, it has two aspects that are very important of that space. That is probably something that you find in many of your installations. That is, first of all, is an usual space. I mean, it's the reception of the Proa Foundation. I mean, there is a lot of people there doing things because there is a locker room and there are some other services in that space. So that's interesting how your installation is part of this use of the space. And then in many other of your installations, as in Proa, you have to explore the space. I mean, you have a first impression of the space when you enter, but then you have to explore the space and you find some other perspectives of the same work. It's very, very different as other uses of site-specific installation when you can see the whole project in only one view. But in this case and many of your projects, I saw that you have to, walk and find and discover some other perspective of work. Then that's a very, very important part of your projects.
Yes, there is always a kind of aspect of the labyrinth or of the maze.
Mm-hmm.
That you, of course, find in the brain.
The idea of labyrinth is very important. And it's very important for Argentinians because of Borges. The labyrinth is something that is part of our culture, our literary culture. So it's it's really very, very interesting to have your installation in this exhibition at Proa, and it's very interesting for people to have the opportunity to see this kind of work in Buenos Aires. So sometimes your work is very known, but it's very known from photographs, or it's very known from the media, and that's something that you have to deal with, I think.
I think it's the first installation in Latin America. Mm-hmm. So there was never a big installation.
And how do you deal with the register of your works? I mean, with the photographs and media, and how your work moves along all these different kinds of information spaces.
I mean, for most of the things I'm doing, this is the only these are the only images that are still there. The installations we spoke about in Kassel, they are of course gone. They are just photos left, and so the significance of the things I'm doing was always playing a role for me. So how is the media reacting on it?
Okay, so and for ending this interview, I would like to ask you how do you work in your studio? You have a lot of assistants. You prefer to begin with an idea yourself, and then work with assistants. How do you work? You have
it's a very small team. So there is my wife is involved. Julian, my assistant, is involved. And then for certain projects, I have people that help, but I prefer to have a kind of very it's a very small team, and a lot of the things of course are also produced with companies, and with them I'm working since many years, so it makes life easier. They know exactly what I want, and I know they are reliable, and if things like the installation in Proa, we have to look for a company on site because they have to print and to apply. So therefore, it's anyway necessary to have somebody on the spot to do it, and usually it works well. So it's I mean, an important part of the work is to communicate with the people that are involved.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So, well, thank you, Peter, for your time, for your words, for your thoughts, and for sharing with us your installation at Proa, and for these minutes to talk about your work and how it has evolved in the last years. Thank you so much.
Thank you also very much. It was a pleasure. It was also a pleasure with the whole team of Proa, also with Sigismund and Juan, that they trusted in my work. So I'm very happy that it's on you in Buenos Aires, and I hope we meet in the near future, either in Buenos Aires or in Vienna. Thank you so much.
Yeah, somewhere. You are everywhere. So thank you so much.